I would like to introduce our speakers and moderators for the next session. They're doing double duty today. I know their white papers have been circulating among many of you, so you're familiar with their work. But Ray Gifford and Matt Larson are partners at Wilkinson Barker Nauer firm in their Denver office. Ray and Matt have a wealth of experience and knowledge spanning state and federal energy regulations and policy, and recently penned a series of 3 white papers on how state actions are challenging wholesale electric markets, which they'll share more about in this session. So Matt and Ray, take it away.
Thanks. I'm Ray Gifford. Matt is the young youngster next to me. We're also joined up here by Dave Farnsworth, pardon me, who is at the manager of North Dakota Power Generation and Engineering at Great River. And Matt and I are going to talk kind of generally what's going on in the energy markets around the country and the trends that are driving regulatory practice. Dave, I think, is going to bring it down to a North Dakota level. And of course, you don't need to know Commissioner Randy Christman, who you already know. I met Randy on the 7 train to Citi Field at a NARUC conference 3 years ago, where he told me how much he admires Minnesota's energy regulatory policy. I think that was it, right? Yeah, something like that. And to give you my bona fides, I have known Tony Clark since about 2000, when he was a newly elected commissioner, and I was already a 1-year minted commissioner in Colorado. Tony still looks like he's sometime in his 30s. My hair turned gray during the intervening period. But Tony is also now our colleague at Wilkinson Barker in the DC office. So plenty of North Dakota ties here. What we want to set the stage for you this afternoon is to describe what's going on in wholesale energy markets around the country. Fortunately for North Dakota, you are not on the bleeding edge of what's going on in those markets, because for better or worse, they are under a great deal of stress and may be disintegrating before our eyes. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what's driving that. And then we'll have a discussion as to how that will or will not get resolved. Matt, is anything else I should talk about before we start?
No, you did a great job.
Oh, good. I bring Matt to just affirm me. So let's start with the PowerPoint. There we go. And so what we're going to talk about are around market, in market, and other happenings in organized electric markets. I know in this audience that you all have some passing familiarity with wholesale electric markets and restructured markets, but I do want to set the stage as to what has been going on lately and where this may or may not end up. I'm pointing somewhere. Okay. If someone could just advance the slide. There we go. So this map probably looks familiar to you. It is the United States, in case you were wondering. What we have depicted up here are the various RTOs and ISOs that FERC superintends across the country. It may be a little wishful thinking there that Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona are colored into their own RTO. But as you know, since the early 2000s, late 1990s, FERC has superintended wholesale markets across the country. Each one of them has a slightly different flavor and a slightly different structure, and that's going to be important to you going forward when we talk about SPP and MISO, where you are now, where the main activity that's been happening is, and where the main stresses have been happening, are in the Northeast, the New England ISO, the New York ISO, and in particular PJM. None of these markets is necessarily categorically immune to what's going on, but PJM in particular is probably the purest expression of a merchant model market, and that's where you've seen the states, depending on your point of view, either step in to correct a market failure or step in to mess up the market even more than it's messed up already. So slide. And what's been happening is that nuclear power in particular, which has the highest fixed cost of any generation source, is not finding itself sustainable in the wholesale markets. Why that is, we're going to talk about a little later. And so what the nuclear owners have done is gone to the states, and particularly two states where they've passed legislation in Illinois and New York, to require under state law that load-serving entities purchase a certain quantity of what are called zero-emission credits. And those zero-emission credits are then used and flow back to the owners of the nuclear plants. What that does, in essence, is allow the nuclear plants to recover their fixed costs and sustains them into the market. That model started in New York, where Exelon had 3 reactors in upstate New York. It spread to Illinois, where the Future Energy Jobs Bill was, and if we could go forward a slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm mixed up. So let me talk about what is causing the crisis in the markets. And I'm not going to presume or pretend to tell you which contribution is the greatest, and everyone has a slightly different take on that. But I think it's generally acknowledged that the 3 forces that are causing these markets to be stressed are PTC and ITC, for that matter, favored renewables. They both have a large tax advantage, as I think many in the room know, low gas prices, and then low demand. And when you put this cocktail of causes together, you get market prices that are driving higher fixed cost units off of the dispatch stack and making them, in essence, uneconomic. How this happens is the highest fixed cost units go first, which would be nuclear. Coal comes second, which also has high fixed costs. And even combined cycle natural gas, you've seen fail in both ERCOT and CAISO. So it's not just a nuclear problem, it's not just a coal problem, it's a high fixed cost problem. And when you start seeing 2 major combined cycle natural gas units go bankrupt in the last 18 months, you know you have a problem. So next slide. And here's just an example of what is part of the problem. This is a snapshot from what's happening in MISO on a given day. Among the contributions to the problem are wind can bid in and is economically sustainable at a negative clearing price. If, by contrast, you have fixed costs to cover and you have a high capacity factor, you aren't just not making money during the time that that market goes negative, you're losing money when that market goes negative. This is not to say that wind is the primary culprit. I think even the DOE has acknowledged that low natural gas prices is probably a bigger contributor, but it does show how kind of a series of regulatory policy decisions that we've made in the United States does not fit very well into a market model. So Matt, I'm going to hand it to you. This is a nice one.
This one seems better. So if we go to the next slide. So we started looking at this, some time ago last year, and started looking at what was going on in the various states as Ray's kind of described, and it became clear to us after beginning to look at this that these were not one-off state actions, and that these were really more of we were seeing a trend, and it was a trend that was flowing through many of the states, particularly in the eastern markets, PJM, New York ISO, New England ISO. So we endeavored to try to categorize. We tried to pull them all together and then categorize, and that was sort of the basis of the original paper that we wrote. And we ended up putting the around market solutions, or around market actions, as we called them, into 3 buckets, right? So the first one that we had, and both of these first 2 bullets have a legislative vein as well as an administrative vein. So there's instances where legislatures have done this. There's also instances where PUCs and PSCs or other regulators have done this at other administrative agencies. But there were some states like Massachusetts and California that just decided, you know what, we're going to let our nuclear go. We're going to let it close early. We're going to let it shut down, and instead we're going to come up with a legislative or administrative resource mix to replace it. And particularly given that it's Massachusetts and California, they started looking around to try to pull in other kinds of zero-emission resources to replace all the carbon-free electricity that they were receiving in those markets. So in Massachusetts, the legislature came up with a combination of offshore wind and hydropower. In California, it's a whole potpourri of various things, from batteries to distributed generation to solar, but all of those things were mandated by the PUC pursuant to a settlement to backfill the load associated with the nuclear. The second bullet was the one that really has gained quite a bit of steam across the country, and that is what we call the maintenance fee model. It's essentially a backdoor capacity payment to nuclear units. And we saw that in New York, where it was developed at the administrative level as part of the broader clean energy standard. And then we also saw it in Illinois, where it was passed through the legislature in a fairly remarkable process. It was about a 500-page bill that was put through during the veto session. So over the course of 5 days, that bill was introduced and passed. So that was the way that Illinois ended up handling it. Ohio has been looking at this, although it has not been successful to date, and there continue to be rumors in Pennsylvania and New Jersey that a similar kind of backdoor capacity payment through the creation of zero-emission credits will ultimately come to fruition either through the legislature or at the administrative level. The common denominator amongst all those places is Exelon. Exelon has been was the driving force behind the Future Energy Jobs Bill, and in Illinois, and then they've been really behind putting these ZEC systems in place. The third bullet up there, and we have not had a state, at least in the past couple of years, do this, but it's the ultimate around market solution. It's vertical reintegration. It's walking away from the markets altogether and saying we're going to go back to have a vertically integrated structure. If you go to the next slide. So this slide just has some of the details about the New York Clean Energy Standard. I think what's important is a couple of things here. You can see, the level of amount of dollars that we're talking about in terms of payments to these units. The other thing that's going to become important as we talk in a couple of minutes is how the pricing for these is set up, right? So it's priced based upon the social cost of carbon. And what happens is that the nuclear units generate the ZECs. They then give them to an administrative agency in New York, and then the load-serving entities are required to acquire the ZECs from the administrative agency in New York. And it's kind of like a money laundering scheme at some level, right? Because the goal was to insulate it from the reach of the Supreme Court in Hughes versus Talon Energy, which we'll talk about in a moment. And if you could flip to the next slide. And then this one shows that the Illinois Future Energy Jobs Bill is a little bit of a different flavor. And what you see is there's a significant amount of low-income energy programs that were all part and parcel with this bill. There was also a state RPS uptick associated with this bill. But the core of it is the ZEC system. but they put things all around it in order to build a diverse coalition of stakeholders that ultimately were able to get the bill through. And what was interesting about the Future Energy Jobs Bill is when it was originally introduced, the coal was covered too. And the coal lost out over the course of as it was negotiated in front of the legislature, but they had a fixed resource adequacy plan that would have covered the downstate coal units. Those units got left out in the cold. The nuclear units did get covered, and that bill is currently law in Illinois. If you go to the next slide. So recently, all of these were subject to litigation, and we're now finally starting to get the first round of decisions in the district courts. I mean, I think certainly my expectation would be that these will ultimately go to the U.S. Supreme Court. But what we're seeing is that the courts are being very deferential to the states in terms of their ability to craft around market solutions. And at the end of Hughes versus Talon Energy, where the Supreme Court struck down the Maryland contract for differences approach, there was a laundry list of different items that the court decided not to address. Actions that states could take that would not be, infringe on FERC authority. And, what really New York and Illinois have done is sort of tested that theory. And the courts, particularly the Southern District of New York, has interpreted this very broadly, and that the standard for whether one of these actions is permissible is whether it's independent of the auction, which is a very, very broad standard in terms of developing these actions. If you could go to the next slide. And this was timely for purposes of this presentation. The DOE has put out a notice of proposed rulemaking on September 29th. It's called the Grid Resiliency Pricing Rule. And we sort of half-jokingly referred to it as a around-market solution from in the market itself. And what it does is it creates, well, there's not a lot of detail in it, so it's not totally clear everything that it will do. But in the one paragraph that has substance in it, it essentially creates a cost of service regime for select units that have a 90-day fuel supply on site, so long as they can meet, so long as that they can satisfy select requirements that are also contained in the rule. And one of those is that they're not subject to cost of service rate regulation by any state or local authority. But this is really a huge development in this space, and there was quite a bit of uproar associated with it, particularly from the environmental community. I think from our view and based on the research that we've done, this wasn't terribly surprising. We've seen these things continue to germinate, across markets and coming from the state level. So it wasn't terribly surprising to see a federal agency, although they used a little used proposal mechanism to be able to bring it forward. It wasn't terribly surprising to see something like this for the coal-fired generating units. Go to the next slide. So, and this is something we'll get into with the panelists once we start doing the moderated portion of this. But what's next? So does the court's broad construction of Hughes versus Talon Energy, that independent of the auction standard, if that's upheld, does that lead to an around market renaissance in the states? Does that cause states to now continue to push forward? Because what we saw in the aftermath of New York and Illinois was states kind of getting cold feet about these around market solutions. Should we really be putting in these ZEC systems given the potential costs to customers that are associated with them? And now that there's a little bit of a decreased litigation risk, I think, in some folks' mind, given what we've seen from the courts. So whether that will cause new around market solutions to be proposed in other states. And then I think the last bullet there is particularly important, is what is the FERC going to do with this notice of proposed rulemaking? What do they ultimately do? I don't think that they will end up adopting a rule that looks like the one that DOE has put forward, but how does FERC react to that? How does FERC run with that? And I think that's what we'll really be watching from an around market standpoint going forward. Go to the next slide. So these are just a compilation of our papers, some of them from Ray and I, some of them from Ray and our colleague Robin Lunt and I, and then also from Tony. So if you want a deeper dive on that, please take a look at those. And with that, I think we can send it to Dave.
Okay, I'm told this works, so we'll find out. Next slide. Okay, first of all, I'm going to try to maybe drill down a little bit specifically how does, and I'm going to use Coal Creek Station as an example. I'm going to talk about the market, what's influencing our market here in our area, and how is it affecting our, I'll call it our traditional baseload generation. And it all revolves around the market and what are the things that really affect our market here. So next slide. Okay, just a little bit about Coal Creek Station. Coal Creek Station, I'm going to bring this up as kind of emblematic of a lot of the coal plants here in North Dakota, is we happen to be the largest coal site in North Dakota, a coal-fired power plant. We're also the most efficient plant. We've made a lot of changes economic to make our plant economic and efficient. So we have two 6x100 or two 600 megawatt units, and we are a mine mouth plant, so we get our coal out of the Falkirk mine. And very typical of the plants around here, many of them were built around the same time, 1979, 81 for our units, and roughly in that same general time frame for most of the units. Leold's a little older, AVS is a little newer. But generally speaking, these plants were built out during that time frame. Now, this is an important point because one of the things is that many of these plants have been greatly depreciated, and that comes into play into where we bid our power into the marketplace. And now, in our case, we buy and sell all of our power out of Coal Creek into the MISO market, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. We happen to export all of our power to our customers. We have 28 co-ops in Minnesota, and we do that via DC line. It's a very efficient way of transmitting our power down to Minnesota. And so anyway, we are, like I say, we buy and sell all of our power, and we are on economic dispatch. Okay. So with that, I guess I mentioned with that our output is always bid into the market, and we base it upon what we call the incremental cost of production. So if you're going to do things the right way in the market, what you try to do is whatever it costs you to produce that next megawatt of power is what you bid into the market. Because anything above that, even if your fixed costs contribute to it, it goes to decrease your, to go to pay down your fixed costs. So basically, in a true market, you go ahead and you bid and on the incremental cost of your production. So, and we are on economic dispatch. We don't must run the plant, except we don't want to take the power off the unit offline. There's reasons for that. It causes a lot of damage to the plant. So we'll run it down to minimum level. We've gone ahead, and in the past year or so, we've gone ahead and made changes to our plant where we can come down to around 30% load on both of our units. So we'll go down in the negative price environment or low price environment to minimize the losses to our customers, and then we come back up to full load. And we typically operate base load still, even in these markets. So a little bit about what is going on right now is that we run the unit based upon our economic signals. It's all based on economics. Now, what affects that? Well, the lower power prices we heard about affects it. Yes, there's been very slow growth rate in demand. That's been an effect. The effect of lower natural gas prices in our region, basically our plants can compete with natural gas here. In fact, the reason we don't generate a lot with natural gas is because our base load coal-fired plants can compete favorably with natural gas. However, what natural gas does do, even if in the eastern Ohio River Valley, the Carolinas, and other places where natural gas is displacing coal, what it does do is it tends to lower the floor price of electricity. It's a suppressing force on the market. What we really get into here in our area is the amount of wind we have on the system and the increased amount of wind that we're getting on our system. And what that does is that causes a great deal of, when it's very windy and there's low demand, let's say there's not a big heating or cooling load, or it's a weekend and there's low demand, then you get into situations where we're finding we're having to cycle the units way down, because the prices will start to go negative or go very low. So in our region, wind is the big make or break for us as to whether or not we're going to operate at full load or not. And so those are the main economic factors that affect us here in North Dakota. Now, I've got a couple graphs up here, and these are a little bit telling, but Great River Energy's energy mix, if you take a look at the left-hand graph, that shows what, we have a fairly varied mix. We don't have any nuclear, but aside from that, we pretty much have all the other resources. And the darker blue that you see there is the coal generation, and then the lighter blue is our natural gas. Now, we don't have any combined cycles, but we have a lot of natural gas peaking plants in Minnesota. And then you see we have some hydro, and you can see the greenish or olive color, whatever color it is that you're looking at. That is our wind. And we have a lot of wind under contract. We're a co-op, so we don't have a tax appetite. And so therefore, we have to, because of the mandates in Minnesota to have a certain percent renewable, we contract out to get our wind. And I should also note that I've been told by our people that by 2021, we'll have an additional 400 megawatts of wind in our system. Now, the right-hand side is the one that shows where do we actually get our energy from. So in other words, what is generating most of the electricity that is going to our customers. And on the right-hand side, now this is before we shut down Stanton Station, which would have had a little bit of an impact on that number. But there you can see basically 60% of our power is coming from our baseload coal generation in North Dakota that goes to our customers in Minnesota. You can see wind is, wind's got about a pretty good capacity factor in North Dakota, I think upwards of about 40%. But you can see our natural gas is a very small component of our energy because the fact of the matter is it's not economical for us to run those units as it is for us to get our power coming out of Coal Creek Station. Now, this map you've probably seen many times, but this is where the wind is located in the United States. So as a consequence, our wind farms are located in North Dakota or southwest Minnesota. And you can see through, we are in the MISO market, but other places, for example, Basin is in the Southwest Power Pool, which is right down that wind corridor going down the Great Plains. So wind is the big differentiating factor in North Dakota and in our area. Now, I'll talk a little bit about the MISO area because MISO is not uniform in terms of its power generation or even how it works. We have what I'll call the north area, and then you have a central area. So north I would call Minnesota, North Dakota, Iowa, and then you have Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana. And then MISO had the south area added into it. And they have a whole different mix. You don't have as much wind, for example, in the central area. And down south, you have a lot more natural gas. So it influences basically, MISO is not uniform across its service territory, but we operate in what I would call the north area, the north central area. So it's a little bit hard to see, but I'll just point out where we are. You can see the different energy mixes between these. One of them shows 2016, one of them shows 2017. But the bar off to the far left is what I'll call the central area, and you can see a lot of their energy is coming out of the coal units, but they have very little wind. It's not very windy over there. So they're under a different set of influences than what we are for the market. We are the next bar over, and you can see that green there is the capacity for wind in our area, and you can see that that's a substantial portion of what we end up dealing with. You go to the south area, that light blue is natural gas, because down in Louisiana, Arkansas area, there's an abundance of natural gas coming out of the gas fields down there. And this just basically shows that, wind has been on a constant and substantial growth, and we don't, even with the phase out of the production tax credits, there's still a bunch on the books that's due to come into the marketplace. And now the line up above and the bars are not to scale. There's two different scales there, so don't read too much into that. But what I do want to show you here is this is important for us because this determines how much we cycle. You can see that wind in our area has a seasonal consistency to it. So, for example, the springs around here in our region tend to be very windy. And that's also when demand is low because it's starting to warm up and not as cold out. So power prices in the springtime tend to drop quite a bit, and for all those reasons I just mentioned. Now, our two biggest demand months because of the heat and the air conditioning is July and August, which coincidentally happens to be the lowest wind production months. So it's kind of a counter-cyclical thing that we have in our region, and I just wanted to point that out. Now, this has been referred to here, and I'll talk about this. This is what the dispatch curve looks like in our area, in the north central region. And I'll just describe this graph here a little bit. So down on the bottom, you see what I'll call the market price, or the bid price for electricity. So what happens is, and then all these little colored dots are the generation resources that are out there. Now, wind is not on the graph because wind, because of the subsidies, is, they can, in fact, they bid into the market price at negative prices. That's where they bid, because they can make money at negative prices. So they're not even on the graph. So maybe I'll take it from the most expensive down to the cheaper. If you go to the far right there, those would be natural gas peaking plants, simple cycle peaking plants, which is what our particular plants are in Minnesota. And then as you work your way, you see a big flat line, and those are combined cycle plants in the area. So they're natural gas combined cycle, a little bit lower incremental costs. And then you start getting into the blue, and that's the coal-fired plants in our region. And then you get off to the far left, and you got a few nuclear plants there. Now, the fixed costs, as you heard on nuclear, are very expensive. Huge costs that were put into those things, and plus the way they were incentivized, probably they just kept building and adding more cost onto them. But where we operate in North Dakota, if you go to the flat line, probably on the far left, it's very flat there. So any little bit of cost differential in there can put you into cycling the units quite a bit. And that's where the North Dakota plants find themselves right now, is in that very flat region off to the left. So what happens is when you don't have much wind, you can see that our plants would be base loaded. When you start to get into a lot of wind on the system and, of course, little demand, then you're finding yourself off to the left-hand side. And that's where we find ourselves in regimes where we're cycling our units quite a bit. Now, this is something I'm going to talk about. It was talked about this morning about the value of more renewables as you add more and more renewables onto the system. And it was mentioned that you get very little benefit as you add a lot of renewables onto the system because you still have to go ahead and balance them with some sort of dispatchable resource. And so what I'm going to show here is a couple slides from EPRI where they've done some modeling, the Electric Power Research Institute. And for our region here, they took actual data on just a couple days as an illustration and said, what happens if we add 60 more gigawatts of wind into our market? So what if we allow another 60 megawatts or gigawatts of wind to come into the MISO market in our region where we operate? And right now, just to put it in perspective, we have about 20 gigawatts of wind, roughly. So this is in a day in the summertime. So this would be where we have, a great deal of, the wind is a little less. We have a high demand. So the line, the red line up there is the demand for the power. So you can see during the daytime it comes up and then it goes down in the evening. And then down below is actual, based on historical wind data, what we might see. So if you add 60 gigawatts of wind into the system, although you still have to operate your fossil plants or nuclear plants, what you see, though, what happens is when demand is, when the wind dies down, there's a couple of spots there showing in the first little segment there, it shows that, I guess in this case, demand is coming up when the wind is dropping off in the morning, and now all of a sudden we got to come up with some dispatchable resource that we got to go ahead and ramp up. So you might have units operating at low load that you've got to come up, or you've got to build gas plants that you've got to bring up, or you've got excess hydro you've got to bring up. And then you go over to the other side when evening is coming and the wind picks up, now all of a sudden you've got to drop everything off. And so this is kind of the idea behind the cycling. Now let's say you add 60 gigawatts of wind onto the system. This is a few days in April. Now here's what you see here is the red line again is the demand. You can see it's much less dramatic. It's kind of fairly steady because the heating and cooling demands aren't very much. But what you see there is the wind is much more dramatic in the springtime. So now you get into a situation here where you have, in some cases, you have to take the units off. You have to curtail your wind because you have no place for it to go. So adding more and more wind is not necessarily beneficial because of, you certainly would cycle more, you'd be turning off units more, and the wind you'd have to curtail. So this is actually showing you what does it really look like to cycle a unit. So these are our load graphs here. I've just got several months in here so you could see. We have 2 units, so there's 2 different colored lines there. This is August of 2016. So you can see we're basically base loading the unit. We had 1 unit trip in there. But the other time, there's a few points in there where the wind, we had some low prices where we cycled down. But for the most part, it wasn't very windy, and we were operating at high demand, and we were operating the unit at fairly close to full load the whole time. Okay, this is the month of October. Now I'll describe a few events that were going on here. There's a big drop for several days. We dropped both units down to tune our boilers for low NOx operations, so that was something we did. Next one you see where it went all the way to the bottom. One of our units tripped. And then you can see what's probably a tube leak outage or something a little further on one of our units. But all the other drops there, all the other cycling was due to the fact that we didn't have very much demand in the month of October because temperatures are moderate and we had a fair amount of wind that month. In the month of December, we had, as you recall, we had a lot of storms in the area. And even though they didn't get as much snow in Minnesota as we did, they certainly got the wind. But it was also very cold. And so generally we were base loaded, but during some of these wind events and stuff we were having, you could see where we cycled down the unit. And then just looking at just recently here, July of 2017 was our 3rd best production record in our history at Coal Creek Station, and this is what it looked like. So you could see even at these high production levels, there's still a certain amount of cycling that will go on because of what's going on with the market prices. So that's kind of what it looks like. So what does it cost for a base load unit to cycle more? And first of all, it hurts our economics because the denominator gets less. So the cost per megawatt produced, we still have a lot of fixed costs. We still, we're not going to lay off a bunch of people because we're going to be cycling down and out. So there's a lot of costs that we incur that are spread out over fewer megawatts that we sell. The other thing that happens with coal-fired power plants is, and nuclear plants have even bigger problems than we do here, but the plants become less efficient at these lower loads. The equipment does not operate as efficiently. The emissions control equipment, in some cases you can't even go there because of how your equipment is tuned. And so you're just not as efficient, and that increases your costs. Your heat rate goes up, which means you're burning more coal for the megawatts that you get. And then we have increased maintenance costs. When you cycle, think of it this way, is if you have a house and you're turning on and off your motor all the time, or you're going up and down in speed and load, and you're putting on the brakes, or you're doing this, you're going to be wearing out your equipment. And so you get a lot of thermal cycling with the units, and that causes metallurgical problems. You get cracking of boiler tubes. You start wrecking your air heater seals. You have all kinds of issues that you have with that. In addition to that, you're starting and stopping motors, you're cycling electrical equipment, and so those adds a lot of maintenance costs onto your system. And now, we've been operating in this regime for a fairly short period of time, so we're trying to gain some experience on what happens when we have to cycle these units more. And I'm just going to give you one illustration. If you take a look at these turbine blades here, we did our 9-year turbine overhaul on this unit. First time we'd opened up this unit since we put in all new rotors 9 years ago. And what you can kind of see if you look closely on these turbine blades is that you'll see chunks taken out of these turbine blades. And what has happened here is that we have some tubes within our boiler we call reheat tubes, which develop what I'll call a protective iron oxide layer. We call it magnetite layer on the inside of the boiler tubes. And when you cycle the unit, you undergo temperature fluctuations within those tubes. And you start to exfoliate that protective layer, and it comes and it impacts these turbine blades at 3,600 RPM. And now we have to go, and we were totally surprised by it. This occurred this spring. We had to go and we had to get new blades manufactured in Bangor, Maine. We had to send our rotor down to Dallas. We had to extend our outage by 25 days. This event roughly cost us about $4 million. About half of that was replacement power costs for having a longer outage. The rest of it was the added work that we had to do to expedite getting this done. So it has a material cost to us, and this is an example of the kind of things you encounter. So what is our new reality? So the reality is we're going to continue to dispatch economically and to minimize our members' rates. We don't want to be operating at high loads when the market prices are low. We lose money, and we want to make money when we can at the higher rates. Above our incremental cost of production, we want to be there as much as we can. We expect to cycle more as more wind comes onto the system. We're not expecting a big increase in demand. We got a slow growth rate, but not compared to probably the amount of wind we're going to have on the system. We'll continue to adjust our maintenance and operating costs. Now that we know we got some issues, we'll be better prepared next time around. In 2019, when we go into that other unit, we're going to have a spare set of turbine blades already manufactured and ready to put in there. So we're gaining this experience to try to minimize the impacts of these increased maintenance costs. There will be increased costs, but we're trying to minimize them. The other thing we're going to do is look at new revenue opportunities. At Coal Creek Station, for example, we've got ethanol plant that we built onto it to use waste heat for that. We used waste heat to dry our coal. We're looking at maybe ways of turning our scrubber sludge into fertilizer. We have different things that we're looking at. How do we, we do fly ash. We sell nearly all of our fly ash coming out of the plant into the concrete market. So what can we do to get increased revenues to offset our increased costs? And then basically, in all of our resource plans, we continue to be in the market. We're going to be low-cost producers. At a minimum, we're going to be a big hedge against the market. We need to be there for our customers. And so right now, Coal Creek looks to be operating, as far as we could see it. So that's, I think, the last slide I have.
So Randy, you are going to bat cleanup for us here and solve all of both the federal and state regulatory dilemmas that we're facing. Is that easy enough?
That sounds pretty simple.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, folks, first of all, you are out of overheads or slides here today. Emily couldn't have been more kind. She was offering for me to submit some. But yesterday we had a huge hearing at the Capitol. And as citizens in North Dakota or people with business interests in North Dakota, you should be very, very pleased at this committee that's working. Senator Rich Wardner's the chairman, and his, the Interim Transmission and Generation Committee, something on that order, is delving into this stuff, and they are really working hard on enhancing their knowledge of all these things and asking a lot of tough questions. And I wanted to not have a prepared set of slides and just go through them, but to be able to respond to some of the things that I found most interesting throughout that process, as well as Emily's question of what does the state do to challenge wholesale market changes. So kind of a merger of those two things. And I think when we look at what the state does to challenge market changes, a couple of things you should keep in mind. First of all, it's not a thing for the state government to do exclusively. I think for the state to challenge market changes, that is a combination between leadership of state government as well as leadership of utility companies, leadership of industrial organizations. It's all of us. that has to do that. And so today, when I refer to leaders, I'm not talking just about political leaders, but especially utilities as well, because there's a lot of you in the room. And I like to jazz the three groups of utilities that we regulate at the Public Service Commission, that everybody hates the utility. And that's probably true on the days when they get a bill in the mail and there's an insert in there that their rates are going up. But for the most part, historically, our utilities, whether it's the cooperatives or the investor owns, over the course of over a century in North Dakota have been fantastic corporate citizens, done a lot for their communities, not just getting dependable and affordable power to those communities, but being really good corporate citizens. So making, pushing back on changes in wholesale markets is going to be a role for all of us. But for how we respond, I think the first thing we need to do is look at our culture in North Dakota. How do we respond to big things like this? And so I want to take you back a little bit, a couple decades, to the 90s, when there was a previous total firestorm in the area of electric utilities. And across the nation, states were talking about leaving their vertically integrated models of electric utilities and restructuring and going to a competitive model. And we talked about that in North Dakota too. In fact, I got to be selected to be one of 6 people on an interim restructuring committee. And in my mind at the time, restructuring was a kind of a code word for deregulation. That was certainly my intention going into it. And I certainly sensed that 4 of us had that preordained intention that that would be our committee recommendation, that we completely deregulate. I, like Commissioner Clark, came in the same time as I did into the legislature, but a lot of us came in the mid-90s, kind of swept in sort of a conservative revolution, and free markets sounded like the perfect thing to me. That really scratched my itch. And so, but we did like North Dakotans do. We didn't just quickly react. We studied it hard. We had meetings around the state. We listened to people. We went out of state to go learn more. And when I think back to that time and how I started fairly early in that process to see that my initial instinct was probably wrong, now when I think back to that, I think of an idiom, and we did the opposite of the common idiom. You know, you often hear people say, you shouldn't just do something a certain way because it's always been done that way. Well, back in the 90s on that committee, I was thinking, you know, we shouldn't necessarily change something just because we've done it the same way for a long time. I recognize that in North Dakota, our vertically integrated structure had allowed for the state to build an export market of very valuable electricity that brought a lot of returns to the state. And even in this low population, large footprint state where there's a lot of miles of line to put up, we had very dependable service at very low cost. And so in the process of that, I and I think most of the rest of the committee changed our minds and said, we shouldn't fix this because it's not broken. However, a lot of other states took a different route. They were mostly larger population states, but the better characterization of them was that they were the high-cost states. And they made the changes and restructured. FERC also made changes, and we got the RTO system that we have now. And I think if you look around the room right now, you probably see pretty much the entire population of North Dakota that could name a single person or leader of an RTO. To most of the people that you serve as customers or that we serve as constituents, these RTOs are nameless, faceless organizations, and behind those nameless, faceless people, we don't know what their personal motives are, we don't know what their personal biases are, but they speak to us with a lot of confidence that they've got it under control, the system's reliable, everything will be fine. That's what we're getting from these RTOs. And the fact of the matter is, just because we chose to not leave our vertically integrated system, the RTOs still have a great deal of influence over our companies. And one of the things that I heard yesterday was, well, at the end of the day, this is for the investor-owned utilities, it's still the Public Service Commission that are the ultimate regulatory body. However, I would point out, if an RTO agrees to do a multi-state transmission line somewhere and assigns some certain percentage of that cost to one of our utility companies, there's not a whole lot that your Public Service Commission can do but to grant rate recovery to that without putting that company in a very bad financial situation of having to pick up the costs outside of their rate structure. And so, yes, we are the ultimate regulatory body, but the RTOs have a lot of influence in it. But to Emily's question about what we do to push back at these organized markets, and before I even get to that, there's another couple little qualifiers I want to add, and I'll eventually get to the question, so don't sweat it there, Emily. I don't even like the term organized markets. These are barely even a market, and if we're going to add an adjective to it, I think that probably a better term would be fixed markets or rigged markets, because there are just so many distortions. First among them that have been going on a long time, you have leaders, again, both within companies, within the political world, that do all kinds of things to distort these markets for environmental reasons. It's probably more so in other parts of the country than here, but a lot of influence goes toward making market decisions based not on the cost, not on the reliability, but the environmental implications. Then you have another whole group putting pressure on these markets to make decisions based on economic development. What district is going to be a winner or a loser in this decision? What state's going to be a winner or a loser? What region of the country is going to be a winner or a loser? So we distort the market again for economic development purposes because, you know, I admitted to you earlier, I've been in politics since '94. We all like to be at the ribbon cutting. And it's a reality, and we do it, and we do it to the extent that it distorts the markets. And the newest one are the production tax credits. And I know I'm going to hear back that, yeah, there's a lot of other subsidies in this industry as well as other industries. I don't know if there is a completely free and pure market of any commodity in the country anymore. There's always some kind of tax or regulatory influences. But most, and I'll get on the energy system, most of the subsidies that have been there for years and even decades have been things like discounted royalty rates, income tax reductions or forgiveness, sales tax exemptions, maybe alternative taxes that are alternatives to a centrally assessed property tax, those kinds of things, but they've always been designed to encourage someone to enter a market, and then after they enter the market, to compete in that market. To me, the production tax credit is its own unique type of subsidy, and I'll wait to be corrected, but I can't think of another subsidy quite like it in that for these two reasons. It is a subsidy that is greater than the variable cost of the commodity that it subsidizes, and it's based on sales. So the market participant that has that very low or non-existent variable cost of their production and qualifies for the PTC wins 100% of the time over someone who does not. That is a different type of subsidy than all the others in my mind. And so that's why I say it's kind of a rigged market, but it's the one that we operate in. So what do we do about it? And first of all, I will say, what have we done? It's been kind of minimal. Your Public Service Commission, and I would be derelict in my duties. I can't tell you in any stronger words than I got to be the luckiest guy ever to chair the Public Service Commission at this time in history with Commissioners Julie Fedorchak and Brian Krashus. Fantastic commissioners to work with. Before Brian came on board, we had the previous BK, Brian Kalk, but all four of us in my 4.5 years here, and our investor-owned utilities in the room, I'm sure will back me up on this. We've been asking questions about reliability the entire time, and I don't think that we have ever denied rate recovery for anything that came in that made a good case regarding reliability of the system. And so we've been focused on it, but I fear that there hasn't been enough other focus on it from as many people as there ought to be. And I think that lack of focus up to this point comes for several reasons. One is we're traditionally a very low-cost electric state, like I mentioned earlier, electricity state. So for a lot of our consumers, it's only in very recent times that I've gotten a lot of calls where people have started to notice that their rate increases are bigger and more frequent than what they used to be. But they're noticing now. But until now, there hasn't been a lot of pushback from the consumers on the prices. To the extent that they are noticing, there's a lot of confusion. We often tell them, well, these renewables are the low-cost power source. To me, that's a little misleading because that consumer, they really don't care whether they pay for their power on their electric bill or their taxes. They know at the end of the day, if they're paying more money out for power, they have less money for other things. So to me, the subsidized intermittent power is a low price source of power. It's not necessarily low cost if you add in the variable subsidies there. But there's also another factor that I think has caused us not to really take notice of the impact of the changes in the markets as much as we otherwise would have. In the unique world of electricity, and I can't really think of another commodity that's quite like this, if we raise the rates too much, we don't really lose customers. Other industries, if the Game and Fish Commissioner raises the fishing licenses to $1,000 a person to get more money and nobody gets a license, we notice. It raised it too much, nobody came back. But in a climate like North Dakota, where we have some of the hottest summers in the nation, and we all know we have some of the coldest winters in the nation, we can raise those rates and people do not drop their service, so we don't notice the impact it's having on them. But I would argue the impact is there and we feel it as a society. We feel there's a societal impact when people switch from healthy food to junk food because they don't have enough money left after paying their electric bill. We notice it when they quit taking their medicine. We notice it when they drop their car insurance or something like that. But they're not going to drop their electric hookup. And so that has also caused us, I think, to be maybe not as shook up about what's happening in the electric industry. And so it is changing, though. I'm getting more feedback from people out there that are saying, gosh, it seems like there's always another rate case, and years ago the commission went years without rate cases, and what's going on. And I think our energy secretary, Rick Perry, really, I don't know what's going to come of his proposal, but he really did a great service to the country by bringing this forward. It's got the country talking about it. It's got us talking about it. It's got legislators talking about it. And so finally, I think we, in our electric planning, have moved beyond the impact to the environment and the impact to someone's local economic development goals, and are also focusing on reliability and resiliency. And those are fantastic. And last points, I want to just emphasize why I think it is so important that we all, as leaders, both political and business, focus on reliability. 3 points I want to make. I mentioned earlier that the RTOs tend to talk a lot about, very confidently, about how the system is going to be fine. You know, our engineers study all this stuff. We're adding some transmission somewhere, and the reliability is great. All day yesterday and throughout this morning, I've never heard anyone mention NERC. We hear about FERC a lot, but not NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They're contracted by FERC to study our RTOs and do a reliability study. And this comes out every year. I think it's always in December, but sometime about the end or beginning of the following year. And one of the things, they don't make a big deal of it, but if you read the graphs, the information is there. They have a reserve margin, and I should point out the reserve margin that they recommend is different for each RTO because of different weather demands, different makeups of their generation, a variety of reasons. This is a detailed kinds of study. For the MISO market, which is the predominant one I think in the room today, their reference margin level is 15.2%. They don't want it going below that. A couple years ago, it was way above. For this year, it's just over 18%. Seems like everything is going great. But what it seems like no one wants to acknowledge is that and again, the reference margin that they use is 15.2. In 2021, we're going to be down to 15.97. In 2022, we will probably be the first RTO to go below this and fall to 13.89. Well, that's still, only just a little over a percentage under their margin. Here's what I find alarming. By 2026, they predict 9.07%. We're falling way below NERC's reserve margin recommendations, and we have to do something about the reliability in this country. So that's one reason why I want to emphasize the importance. The others are, we've talked a lot about our mine mouth coal plants, and Dave did a great job of explaining the Coal Creek Station. And he's right. These are among the most unlikely baseload generation facilities in the country to close. We've lost one in North Dakota. I expect we'll probably lose one or two more in the next few years. But most of our larger power plants are probably going to be running when many, many other coal plants and nuclear plants around the country have already closed down, also baseload gas plants, because they are so very efficient. I heard an interesting statistic the other day that really drove this point home for me. A coal plant in Minnesota that's closing said that their fuel, their coal, 2/3 of the price is for the transportation to get it there, 1/3 is for their coal. So you can imagine the great benefit that our mine mouth coal plants have over a competitor like that. But I want to emphasize that they're vulnerable too. When we start running them as no longer baseload plants, but more of intermediate plants, almost like peaking plants, when we talk about a 30% run margin on Coal Creek Station, that starts to move that up that ladder on that graph that Dave had to make that a far less efficient plant. And I know I'm not the only one old enough to remember this in the room, but for those of you who remember the terrible day back in the middle or late 80s when we heard that the Coal Creek Station had basically exploded, and luckily no one was killed, but there was enormous damage to that facility. Cost, I don't know what, tens of millions of dollars. By today's numbers, we'd probably be talking hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, every one of these is a complicated, complex mechanical contraption with lots of pressure and chemicals and heat. They're all going to have breakdowns sooner or later. And I would suggest that probably every one of our plants is the next really big breakdown away from being shutting down, because I don't know that you can make the argument that it's prudent to put hundreds of millions of dollars into a plant that's a baseload plant that's going to run 30% of the time. So I would argue that even these baseload plants are ultimately vulnerable. But I know there's a lot of people in the room, because I hear it all the time, that are perfectly comfortable with that because we have this low price intermittent power, and we will back it up with gas. Gas is cheap. We're swimming in gas, right? I did a little study of gas prices throughout my lifetime. This is the one thing I should have had Emily do a chart on, probably. So stay with me. Imagine this in your head. I'm going to give you about 5 numbers. In the early to mid 70s, gas prices were very cheap. And no one was too shook up. But then science and industry noticed that the planet was running out of gas. And well, there were a few crotchety old deniers in the world, but the science was settled. We all knew that the planet was about out of gas. And so by the 80s, gas prices had quadrupled. Think of that, in just over a decade, quadrupled. Well, it turned out then, I guess, that science was wrong and there was a bunch of gas. We just needed to figure out where it was and how to get it out of the ground. And so after it quadrupled by the 90s, it had fallen about to half again. But that's still twice as much as it was 20 years before, but it had fallen in half. And in the 90s again, there was so much gas. That's when I came in the legislature. I remember campaigning in Mercer County, and the question was more when the gasification plant would close, not if, because it was just hopeless to be producing synthetic gas in that low gas price environment, and that was never going to change. Basin Electric does a wonderful job, pulls a rabbit out of its hat, figures out all kinds of alternative ways to make money out there, saves the plant, and by a decade later, gas prices have quadrupled again. Now we're into about the 2005 time frame, and gas prices are through the roof. Well, here we are a decade later, and they've fallen in half again. But of course, they're still about twice as high as 20 years ago, just like the last cycle, but they've come down a lot. And now we seem to be of the feeling that we can use gas as a permanent backup to intermittent power sources for a permanent solution to our electric needs, and that these gas prices can never go up. And I don't know either what could make them go up. It seems like with what we have figured out, with what the oil and gas industry people have figured out, like it should be a permanent solution and it can never end. But then I think in 4 years from now, we could be in the 7th or 8th month of a whole new presidency, and the way things are becoming more and more cyclical in Washington, D.C., and decisions are being made not by Congress, but by the executive branch, I wonder what would happen if there were an executive order banning fracking. Then are we comfortable relying on gas as the only backup to intermittent power sources? So for these reasons that I've laid out, I think it is imperative that all of us, political leaders, business leaders, education people, we have got to stay focused more than we have in the past on the reliability and the resiliency of our electric utility system.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I need to extend apologies on behalf of Ray. His flight is at 3:30, so wish him luck. And if you guys have criticisms of Ray, now would be a good time to offer them. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of questions here, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. And we'll probably do that. We'll open it up to the audience in maybe like 10 minutes. But I wanted to ask you guys both a question, and the chairman just flagged it with regard to the DOE, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. Do you guys view the injection of a cost of service regime into states that are following the, I don't like calling them markets either, the restructured administrative construct Do you view that as a solution to the baseload power exits that are occurring in those markets?
I think the devil's in the detail. I don't know that it's going to be a solution. Certainly, and different utilities are going to take it differently, but there's a lot of problems with what I've seen proposed, but the devil's in the detail, and can you mold it in a way that will help out? Certainly, I know within MISO there's been talk even before this latest Perry plan came up that looking at how do you go ahead and reward base load generation, dispatchable generation, for the services they currently provide for free onto the grid. And that, again, goes to reliability and resilience. So, for example, let's take you back to the polar vortex in, was that early 2015 or 14? There were a lot of coal plants that were called in because of the curtailment of gas supply, and it was very cold in the eastern part of the country. And a number of these plants that were called in to save the bacon, so to speak, are now permanently shut down. They're gone. And so what's going to supplant that? Are you going to build more natural gas because of the cheap gas out of the Marcellus? I don't know. But, there's a certain service, I guess, that these baseload dispatchable resources provide. So depending on how the structure is and what it can do, for example, if there's a market out there for rotating mass that we supply to the system, we're all in favor of it. We supply that currently for free out there, or anytime it's called upon, we're there. Ramping capability of ramping the units. These are all markets that could exist that would reward us for something that is above and beyond just the price of electricity.
Well, if I were king, and I felt like I was at noon today since we had beef for lunch, so I love that. But, I guess I wish that we were going in a different direction. I think that really the need for that market interference that's being discussed is because of too much other market interference from other places. Subsidies that I think have gone awry, and too much political pressure from multiple directions. And so it would seem to me that the better solution is for finding a way to keep everyone from interfering and allowing the various types of generation to actually compete. We need the various types, but we dig in and influence these markets to such an extent that it doesn't seem to be working. If we can't stop interfering, then I guess interference to balance it out and keep each of the required components alive and well and participating would probably be necessary.
Thanks. So the next question is what is the turmoil in these wholesale markets? I mean, what does that mean for North Dakota, given that you guys are both, you're on the regulatory side here and you're on the industry side here? What does this turmoil that we're seeing in the eastern markets mean here? What are you watching? What are you concerned about?
We'd be very happy if we could get the prices we're seeing in PJM right now. Now, that may be turmoil, but it's, they're kind of under some different factors. I mean, the turmoil in their market, has a lot to do with, they've got all these legacy old coal plants that are on, Eastern coal, and they can't compete, and now you got the sudden influx of very low-cost Marcellus gas, and then you've got regulatory interference, and certainly on the environmental side, there's been so much turmoil created by the shutting down of plants due to a number of environmental mandates. And so, I would say in terms of how is it affecting us, I guess I see things very much in kind of how does it affect, I don't know that our market is fluctuating or in turmoil, but it's very low in price right now. And the lowness in price, I don't see that alleviating anytime soon. So and a lot of it has to do, again, with the amount of wind we have on the system. And so we've just got to learn to survive in that atmosphere if we're going to keep running. And we will. But it's going to be, we're certainly not, it certainly has cost us, But in terms of turmoil, Yeah, I guess a little bit, but it's more just low prices we got to learn to live with.
Well, I think you kind of hope that their turmoil works to our benefit sometimes. Do business interests get tired of that turmoil in the Northeast and in places like California and want to relocate to a place like North Dakota where things are a little more stable? You kind of hope for that. Probably more importantly, though, is I think it gives us another great opportunity to learn. Just like I talked about the deliberative process we used when we declined to deregulate in the 90s, or the really pretty deliberative process that a lot of us have used as far as figuring out what to do in these market situations now, I think causes us to be able to step back a moment and watch what is happening in PJM, in the ERCOT down in Texas and the other Northeast markets in California, and learn from it and avoid making mistakes that someone else is maybe generous enough to make ahead of us.
So one last question I want to ask both of you and then open it up to the audience. One thing, the FERC convened a technical conference to take a look at these state around market actions that we've all been talking about up here. And one of the themes that really emerged from that discussion was this idea that should the FERC pursue a policy of accommodation? Should we be accommodating all of these different state interventions in the marketplace? And since we have two folks up here very experienced in the energy business and energy and electricity policy, do you guys think that's the appropriate response at the federal level?
Want me to go first on one?
I just have a very brief opinion on this. The more interference you have with government, usually the more it gets screwed up. So that's my own opinion.
Except the Public Service Commission, right?
Yeah.
No, I do think that it's good if the FERC recognizes state decisions and allows things to move forward. However, there's a limit to that. We can't unring the bell. We're in the situation we're in. Decisions were made a couple decades ago. Our companies are in these regional markets. By the way, if there's anybody here, maybe if I could take a minute to explain why are the companies in these markets? And they don't really have necessarily a lot of choice. Technically, yes, they have a choice. But 30 years ago, our power companies pretty much worked out agreements in a region of the country that they served, so that if their generation plant was going to need to go down for maintenance for a while, they'd do it during shoulder months in the spring or fall or something like that, and work out a deal, make sure somebody else wasn't going down at the same time. They shared some transmission facilities and made sure they were interconnected. They took care of those things. However, the change a couple decades ago that pushed into the RTOs, as companies went in there, their neighboring companies couldn't work out those kinds of side deals with the companies that were already members of RTOs, and so they fell like dominoes and basically, not technically forced, but essentially forced into becoming members of those RTOs. And I kind of lost track of the, so I do think it's good if the FERC recognizes state decision-making and tries to encourage that kind of thing. However, they are that far into it. They need to be a monitor because one state's decision influences the next state over and the next state after that for 10 or 12 states around. And so they've got to make sure that decisions aren't made that have really adverse impacts on the neighboring states through no fault of their own. And that does become a responsibility of FERC, in my opinion.
I'd like to expound a little bit more on my answer. There is definitely a place, I know, for Great River Energy for the RTO in the sense that one of the things, the big benefits of the RTO that we've seen with us is that it creates a much greater footprint for the market for our electricity. So one of the things, if I go back 20 years ago, Great River Energy almost went bankrupt when one of our Coal Creek Station units went down in the heat of the summer, and all we had to rely upon, we didn't have any backup gas generation at the time, We had to go out on the open market doing bilateral agreements, and people were charging us $1,500 to $3,000 a megawatt hour. And so with the RTO, that went ahead, and of course then we went into, I'll call emergency mode of building gas generation as a backstop. But what it also did, though, in having the RTO is now all of a sudden there's a much greater footprint. There's certain, I would say, good regulation that stems around you can't be taken advantage of to the extremes that we were taken advantage of. So there is a good place for the RTO, I think, but probably more my statement was more on when you have the government picking winners and losers on what your generation sources are going to do, and they do it through various regulations, whether it be tax subsidies or whether it be environmental regulations, then you've distorted the market. I mean, these plants in North Dakota can compete with anybody, and but they got to be able to compete on a level playing field, and we can do that. We will continue to be an exporter of energy coming out of this state. What is it? 70% of our power is going out of the state. We will continue to do so. It's a question of at what cost are we going to do it, and we've got to be able to basically operate in what I call a free market system that is not going to be what I will call distorted in ways that keep us from competing effectively.
Do we want to open it up to the audience? Questions?
We have somebody texted a question in. Why isn't anybody proposing just a repeal of the PTC to put markets back in equilibrium rather than further subsidizing coal and nuclear?
Can you repeat the question?
Why aren't people just proposing repealing the PTC to put markets back in equilibrium rather than further subsidizing coal and nuclear to make the playing field more flat?
Yeah, I guess each one of us could take that. I mean, I have not heard that as a Washington, D.C. solution in terms of that being put out there. I think that is a very, very, very dramatic step that would be taken with, I don't know what all the consequences of doing that are, particularly because there's numerous companies that have gone out and procured 100% PTC safe harbor turbines. They have structures in place. They have contracts in place to acquire those turbines. There's projects that are well underway, all premised upon that tax treatment. So I think there'd be quite a few unintended consequences in terms of the way that would flow through the market if that were offered up as a round market solution or a solution to the issues in the organized markets, and whether that would even solve it, I think is an open question too, because of the confluence of factors that Ray was pointing to earlier. Sure, are the tax credits a part of it? Absolutely, but low gas prices are also a part of it. So is flat demand. So you're addressing a piece of the cocktail, but you're not addressing the whole thing.
I believe there's still, we're into a 5-year phase out of the PTCs. Is that still correct? So, in theory, the protection, everybody knows that the tax credits are going to be phased out, and each year it's a 20% less of a credit. However, there's also a move underfoot to go ahead and extend the tax credits that are out there for those wind farms that go ahead and refurbish their units. So there could be a continuation. The question is, with the phase out gone after 5 years, is there going to be a lot of new building? And that's what I think is still open to interpretation. I mean, bottom line is every resource should be able to compete on its own. And with the tax credits gone, are you going to see new wind farms being built? I can't tell you. I can tell you when I lived in California in the 80s, as soon as the tax credits went away, there was no wind farms being built. So, I don't know if that's going to be the case nationally, because the technology has developed quite a bit more than over the last few years.
And I will say, certainly if the questioner meant the payments that are already committed to, that just doesn't seem like the right thing to do. The government made a commitment, and it needs to be followed through on. I'm not sure that I recall a lot of discussion when the extension happened about the safe harbor provision, that we'd be having applications coming in 2017 or 2018 that hadn't even applied yet for siting authority, that were 2016 projects, but that's the way it's working out. So I don't know if there's any room for corrections in that to limit it, or if things are being twisted somewhat from what the legislation actually meant. But for the most part, the horses left the barn on it, and this was the agreement they came to, and it's probably what we will need to work with.
Other questions from the audience? I think we still have a couple minutes left here. I'm going to ask one then to end it. So in terms of, we were just talking about the phase out of the PTC and the step down of the ITC as well. What do you think that means for energy markets as those tax credits go on a downward trajectory? What do you think the impact to the organized electricity markets will be?
With the expiration of the PTCs, you're saying? Yes. Well, my prediction is you won't get a lot of new wind farms being built. I could be wrong on that. There certainly will be certain niche markets. A lot of that, with the PTCs going away, a lot is also going to depend on state mandates. The reason Great River Energy has under contract to have a bunch of wind is because we have a mandate in Minnesota that says we must have 25% renewable by 2025. So it's not just the PTCs. There's going to be what kind of state mandates are we going to see out there, and to what degree is that going to affect things? The other thing, too, is are you going to go ahead and build out transmission? If you're able to build out transmission, the modeling shows that all this wind we have in the throughout the Great Plains here could find a very lucrative market if it can transport it out of the area. So, that could actually cause wind to stand on its own and actually, be a good, viable source for other places in the country. So I think it depends on those factors.
I think I would just add one, almost a question to it, and it's probably a good place to leave things for the day, but I'm not sure that these things, that they are going to go away in 2020. In my lifetime, I haven't seen a lot of government programs end. In fact, I think this has been ended once before and renewed. And so I think the question will be, how seriously do we take reliability? At what point do we value the reliability and the cost, not just the price, but the cost of our electricity, and what do we do when this ends? Is it something that we push for an extension so that we can keep economic development projects flowing, so that we can keep shifting away from fossil fuels? I think those are the questions that I have, is whether this in fact is going to end.
And I think that's a good place to leave it. I want to thank the chairman. I want to thank Dave, and thanks very much for having us here today. I hope it was informative.
I want to acknowledge our silver sponsors for this year's event: Bank of North Dakota, Energy and Environmental Research Center, Geronimo Energy, Lignite Energy Council, MDU Resources, Nesset Consulting Service, North Dakota Petroleum Council, and Ottertail Power Company. Once again, we are here today because of our generous sponsors and the amazing support of our platinum, gold, and silver levels. So please help me thank them for their support. I also want to mention the Spotlight on North Dakota Energy is available. There are several copies out in the lobby, and it just kind of has the statistics and data from all of North Dakota energy sector. So if you haven't picked up a copy, there are plenty available out there. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Brian Kalk. Brian is no stranger to us, having served as a member and chair of the North Dakota Public Service Commission from 2009 to 2017. He is now the Director of Energy Systems Development at EERC, and he will share with us today the highlights and work that EERC is undertaking in each of our energy sectors.
Okay, is it turned on? Obviously, huh? Thank you, Emily. I can't stand the podium. Those of you that know me know I can't. I'm too ADD. And where's Lieutenant Governor at? Is he back there still, or did he take off? Brent, I want to really thank you, because him and I were talking. He asked for the last spot in the day, so that's the one I think is the most pride spot. But the 3 o'clock hour after a panel discussion with Randy Chrisman is the next best spot, right? Okay. So take about 20 minutes or so, talk about what the EERC is doing. And then what I want to do first off is, where's my boss at? Tom, right there. Tom Erickson, I'd like to introduce you to the CEO of the EERC. I started the EERC when, in February, Tom? So I'm in his office, and he's like, okay, Brian, you know that you're on probation for 6 months, right? And I'm like, no, I didn't know that. And he goes, well, you are. Okay, so 6 months later, I'm back in his office like July, and he's like, okay, Brian, you're off probation now. And I'm like, thank God, right? You live in Grand Forks, I've left my other job. But just walking in now, he said, Brian, don't screw this up, because you may be off probation, but you're on double secret probation. So I don't really know what that means, Tom, but it means that if you laugh the jokes, that would be helpful. And at the end, if you would laugh or clap or something, that would also be helpful, okay? So the slide I put up there, the first one is, most of you know where North Dakota's at, right? Most of you know where Grand Forks is at, but I'm amazed by the scope and breadth of the EERC. It's 50 different states, 50 different countries, so we present a lot of places, and we really have to tell people where North Dakota is. And then we have to further break it down to where Grand Forks is. And then they always ask me the question, they say, so North Dakota, you're doing great. You won 5 championships in football, you won a championship in hockey, and I don't even try to explain to them the difference between Fargo and Grand Forks. And then when they say Boise's the capital, I just let it go, right? Because sometimes you can't change the audience, right? Okay. Let's see, the clicker even works. So the EERC experience, you can see it's the gamut. And when I say that the EERC has done great things, obviously I've only been there 9 months, so it's not like I was part of this, but there's been great people there for, what is it, Tom, 53, give or take, when we started? So it's been doing work in the Lignite area, it's been broadening over time, and it's really got a really bunch of great people up there. And so the pitch today is really, many of you know what the EERC does. Many of you are partners with the EERC in different projects. But I'm going to go through 7 different goals that we kind of put together at the EERC prior to our Energizing North Dakota event. And then if there's something that you see as something with the company, some with business, industry, that you'd like to explore further with us, that's what we do, is we bring projects along. As I'm sitting here too, I see Brian Crouchus, I'll call him my replacement on the PSC. Did you notice this morning that Senator Hogan didn't know between Crouchus and Kalk? Or was I the only one that noticed that? Did you notice that? And so apparently, Brian Kalk, BK, they call me at the commission BK 1.0, and him, Brian Crouchus, BK 2.0. And he says I'm the new improved model, all the bugs are worked out, so. And I keep wanting him to screw up in the commission, but he doesn't. So apparently they can function without me. I didn't understand how they could, but they do. Anyway, it's good to see you, Brian. Thanks for coming. And I see Josh Gallion here, our auditor. Josh worked at the PSC for a while, then he got elected to the auditor office this last time. And after we won the election, I said, so did you learn anything at the PSC while you worked there? He said, yeah, I learned from you and Randy and Julie what not to do. So, but I did see your front page and the front page of the paper here at the end of the session, so you haven't got all that down. Okay, this slide is one that I've never actually seen before I got to the EERC, but it really talks about what you've heard a lot of speakers say today. Oh, and there's a flyer somewhere going around that kind of talks about this, but this is the pathway to commercialization. When you have how the EERC fits into this, how the different companies fit into this, but I think it's very telling. You know, off to the left, somebody's got a really good idea. They have some type of innovation that's going to make a better mousetrap, that's going to do something better, and then they go through the different stages of it. We have a research and development stage, then you typically have to build some kind of pilot demonstration, then it gets to full commercialization. And one of the speakers today earlier talked about how it takes time, right? If you're making a new iPad or a new widget, that pathway can be condensed. When you're building a next generation power plant, like we talked about the Allen cycle this morning with 8 Rivers Energy, and Bill, your group of leads is part of that, and when you do that stuff, it takes time, right? It takes a long time, it takes a lot of money, so it's a different pathway to investment on energy projects than it is in anything else. So that's one of the challenges, I think, when you talk to people about, it doesn't happen quickly. And so that at the end of it, right there, we talk about what it really does for the states. Jobs, energy, state revenue, and and of course products. When I think about jobs, I'm looking back at Jason Utton from Laborers 49, right? Stand up, Jason. Come on, stand up. Okay, he's bigger than me. So he's with the laborers. They came to a lot of our different hearings when I was back in the commission. You talk about jobs, most of his guys did the jobs. I remember one of the hearings, I think it was Julie, afterwards she came, Brian, that big guy Jason, he talked to me after the hearing and he said, you commissioners, you better approve this project or we're going to talk. And so that's what you did. Is that true, Jason? Yeah. See? I nailed it, right? Absolutely. Okay, but the point is, I think that through all this discussion, you can't lose sight at the end of the tunnel, right? It's going to be jobs, it's going to be revenue for the state, it's going to be low-cost energy, it's going to be a lot of different things. So these folks that have this myopic discussion, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for at the end of the day. So 7 goals coming up here. The first goal, to have North Dakota produce at least 2, now 3 million barrels of oil per day. This is one thing that Charlie Gorecki, he's my counterpart at the ERC, he does a subsurface group. His folks are the ones that are trying to figure out how to get, instead of 8% oil out of the Bakken, how to get 20% and 30% and 40%. So he put this particular one together. And I think when Governor Bergen was at the petroleum conference up in Grand Forks, was it last week or the week before, he said maybe 2 million barrels is not enough. So we updated our slide, right? But if you think about that, thanks to the work that all of many of you oil producers have done, the commission's work on the pipelines, I mean, we have the export ability now to move 2 million barrels a day. So we have some of those constraints that are out there. Let's get the R&D side taken care of where we can then produce that. And then what that mean for North Dakota is you've got your conventional oil fields, you capture the CO2 from the Allen cycle or the retrofit of Minn Kota's plant for the Project Tundra. You take that CO2 as a commodity for your traditional oil fields. And also for, if you do better characterization and refracs, then we can go back in to get more out of the next generation without having to drill to more wells. We were, some of us in the ERC, when we're in the governor's office here, and Lieutenant Governor, you were in there too, right? When the governor asked about, does this mean we have to drill a whole bunch more wells to meet 2 million barrels a day? And we're like, no, we don't have to do a bunch more wells. We just got to go back and get more out of the wells we've already put in there. So you think about the impacts of getting there, it's not going to be as much. So, but that's one of the huge research goals of the ERC. And so any of you that are out there in the oil producing world that aren't working with us, we'd like to come talk to you about what we're doing. And there's a program called Bakken Production Optimization. Right, Jay? Did I say that right? That basically it's help from the state legislature. Thank you, Senator. The ERC gets a couple $1 million a year to work to leverage with oil companies and DOE to even do more and more research how to optimize that Bakken field. And it's actually going pretty well. And so one of the biggest things we're working on. Next one, maximize ag and energy synergies. We like to compete, right? NDSU and UND, right? But let's be candid. Okay, we can compete in football. Well, we can't compete. We hope NDSU wins. And we can compete in hockey, but UND would always win. But the point is, it's good for inner rivalry in the schools. But when you talk about the research world, when we submit our proposals at the ERC, why not put Ag Extension on there? Why not put NDSU in there? So we put these proposals to Department of Energy or Department of Defense, make sure we have larger partners out there, because the grand scheme of things, no matter how big we are, we're not as big as some of these others. And Tom and the ERC has been doing work with Extension for a long time, but we're really trying to refocus the ag and energy synergies. And there's a Great River Energy and North American Coal working on, I think it's the next slide, basically greenhouse. We're going to try to grow fruits and vegetables in the middle of winter, try to grow fruits and berries in the middle of winter. What the heck? You're not going to use all the CO2, but if you can have one more of these niche products that's created in North Dakota, why not do it? And if this actually works, we could build it all over the place. Always trying to find that value for the CO2. Senator Hogan talked about the ammonia and fertilizer products. I think that's another great idea. Actually, I had a note here to make fun of Lieutenant Governor here. Let's see here. Oh, yeah. Do you remember when we were at so when I had my going away and the governor was talking about the 2 schools? Do you remember that, Lieutenant Governor? See, the governor is a Bison graduate. Lieutenant Governor is a UND graduate, right? So the governor said a few words when I was leaving, and he said, so Brian, NDSU guy, is leaving NDSU, going to UND, and apparently everybody's excited about it because it raises the GPA at both schools. So I think that was a compliment, but maybe not, right? Now I'm moving over here, right? I'm moving over here, getting closer to this side. Okay, but really the work that NDSU has done in this area is great. The work that UND has done in the energy area, it's great. We got to keep linking those two together. Maximize use of natural gas. Everybody's talking about what to do with the gas. And One Oak, Danette and I talk a lot about it. One Oak's got a good system going, but One Oak moves the gas. We need to find groups that come in here and actually can do something to make plastics out of it, to make mud flaps, to make tires, something small that we can produce in North Dakota and then ship economically. That's got to be the way it works. Transportation is always going to be our biggest challenge. But you think about the gas out there, when that oil production goes to 2-3 million barrels a day, gas production is going to increase again. So those flaring issues that we've worked so hard, we've got to find a market for it. And so I am all ears on that. And I also have a note here that, where's our Commerce Commissioner at? Jay still here? Yep, Jay's in the back, and Zoe. Zoe's the business manager. Is that what your title is, Zoe? Business development? So ERC is talking to Commerce a lot. I'd encourage all of you to talk to Commerce too, because somewhere in that initial pathway, Commerce has a role too. Jay gives out free money over there. You just have to go ask. Is that right, Jay? That's what I told. They said Commerce always gives out money. Although I went there the other day and asked for a hat, and he did give it to me. Then he sent me a bill for $28. So, but that was the price for me. It was $12 for everybody else. But okay, keep going on. The natural gas, I really believe we've got to continue to export crude oil. We've got to figure out a way to export LNG as well. Is Tony Clark here? Tony had a flight, I think, maybe later. But when Tony was on the FERC, they approved some of the LNG export facilities in our country. We've got to figure out a way to move more gas overseas. We've got to figure out a way to move more oil overseas, because we don't need it all here, and I think it really ties up foreign policy issues. I mean, we fight wars over energy. I absolutely believe that. But when we think about what to do with natural gas, the transport's going to be the challenge. So figure out what we can make with it here and figure out how we can transport it. This is fussy. Okay, eliminate pipeline leaks. Goal number 4, one of my favorite topics to talk about. So we talk about eliminating pipeline leaks. I got to look here. Carly, you know it's coming, right? What's the biggest reason pipelines fail? Third-party strikes, right? So we talk about eliminating them. One of the things, the biggest reason of pipeline failure is third-party damages. So Julie, so what should you do to eliminate pipeline leaks? Calc before you dig. See, it still lives on, right? Anyway, that's my favorite. But yeah, the call before you dig thing, everything the state has done with one call, we need to keep doing those things. But the focus for the ERC, and the governor has talked a lot about that. Actually, that was one of the things he put out there as a goal, he being the governor, about we are going to eliminate pipeline leaks. You have to have that goal of it. And companies don't want to have pipelines to leak, period. It's lost revenue. It's all these kind of headaches. So what is the ERC doing? Jay Armour, where's Jay going now? Jay, stand up and give a big wave so everybody knows who you are. Jay is our guru doing a lot of work with the UASs that we heard earlier today. But Jay is also leading the effort on our pipeline phase 3 work, and he was part of the phase 2 and the phase 1, dealing with next generation of sensors, dealing with high consequence areas, trying to get some data put together. He's working with individual companies. So if any of you oil producers want to talk with Jay, he can come and give you an idea about things that we're doing. Maybe we can partner with you. And one thing that I still have to get in my head is, I think pipelines, I'm always thinking oil, but it's more than that. It's also natural gas. It's also produced waters. And so Jay's done a lot of work in the produced waters area as well. But if we really want to continue to be a major oil producer, if we can produce those barrels of oil, we're going to have to move them safely. In the pipeline piece, it can't be the farmer finding it in its field. It can't be that way. So this next generation of sensors, I have Rice's logo up there. Rice University has the Smalley Center. No kidding, Dr. Smalley created nanotechnology. You can't make that stuff up, right? It's true. But anyway, Rice has a very good program on that, and the ERC and Rice signed a memorandum of understanding that we're going to work jointly together. And so they're working down in the Texas oil fields, and we're trying to figure out some projects up here with them. But basically, these sensors can go downhole with better understanding where the oil flow is at. They come up through the pipeline, and then as it goes through the pipeline, they're talking to each other all the time. If they hit soil, they tell somebody. We're a long ways from deploying that, right? A long ways. But it's the concept that's out there. They're using the next generation technologies. So when a sensor hits the soil or something it shouldn't, it tells somebody quickly, and then something can happen. I mean, that's what it's got to be. And that one panel today earlier was talking about, the Excel folks come to mind, about how this big data is out there. There is huge big data, and I understand we're managing it, but you got to be able to manage it, make a decision on quickly, and then react to it. I think back to, we were using UASs when I was in Desert Storm in 91, right? We were flying drones out there, and we were flying over looking at the Scud missiles and these little frog missiles. But one of the things we had a challenge with, until we figured it out, is the guys flying it didn't have the ability to launch airstrikes back. You'd think somebody would have thought of that, but the point is when the UAS sees something or does something, or the sensor sees something, you've got to have that loop back so you can do something quickly on it. And that's what we've got to do, is have the data, be able to manipulate it, but then understand what it's telling you and have some type of response to it. So this is all the stuff that Jay's going to solve for us, right? By noon tomorrow? Damn straight. All right, you good guy. So we're talking about next generation technology, and I can't even get the clicker to work. Okay, this is the size of these sensors that Rice has developed, and so we are really looking to find a company that's willing to test those out. Jay can do some stuff on site at the ERC, but really I think that's something that really, we talk about next generation of pipeline safety, maybe work with the commission, maybe work with the different producers, but this would be something that would really help out. Okay, enhanced reliability and energy export opportunities. We just had a panel about all the challenges that are out there with energy pricing and all that, and those challenges are real. I lived those for a few years, and we've got good people working the issue. But one thing that I think that we really want to work at North Dakota is that if we said we're only going to produce enough wheat to feed North Dakota, we're only going to produce enough barley to use in North Dakota, people would laugh at us. They would. So I don't like this argument about we're only going to produce enough energy for North Dakota. I think we have to think that export opportunity. Now there's challenges, I get that. You know, Minn-Kota is only going to build what they need, Excel is only going to build what they need, but there's got to be a way that we can work through some of those pricing issues, because what I see is going to happen. States like Minnesota are going to continue to do what they're going to do. But these regional markets, the states that have generation that keep going on that path, they're going to continue to shut it down. And all of a sudden, they're going to wake up one day and their economy is going back up, and they've shut down their base load, and they don't have enough energy in the grid. There's our opportunity. Now, when does that come? I don't know. But I know that if we don't have that mindset of, yes, let's keep our plants going, let's keep things going, but the opportunity to sell, I mean, that's how I know from the regulatory days, MDU did great. They overbuilt, the Otter Tail did too. They sold into these markets for years, made all kinds of money. But now they haven't been able to do that. But that's where, you know, look at Senator Warden right now, because I know you think like this all the time too. It's the opportunities outside of the state, because we can never use all the stuff we produce. But I really see that as something we've got to do, the R&D side of it, to make sure we're more efficient in the producing energy. Maybe we can figure out the next generation coal plant that load follows. Maybe I was thinking when Dave was talking, maybe the ERC could work with you on next generation materials so those things don't break when you're ramping it up. Those are the things that we'd like to keep researching to tie into natural state goals. This is just a slide of wind and transmission, but the state also has, I won't say plenty of transmission, but thanks to the Minn-Kota line that was built a few years ago, thanks to the CapEx projects, there is transport-export opportunity in the state that we can more fully utilize. So let's just keep fighting for all these resources, keep making it all work, figure out how to make hydrogen out of the excess wind power, figure out how to do all those things, because we have the export opportunity. Okay, maximize the use of coal. We've talked a lot about that today, but I think the way you maximize it, one of the most startling things, I was at a coal conference in Birmingham 2 weeks ago with the National Coal Council, and I've seen the numbers where coal production is kind of dropping a little bit, but nothing really jumped out at me as like it's catastrophic. But when I got to that meeting, it became really clear to me that companies that can export coal, they are exporting their coal. They're sending it to China and India. I mean, I'd heard that, but I hadn't seen it. And so our lignite coal is not ever going to be exported, ever, period, end of sentence. It just has to be mine mouth and something with it. So if we're going to maximize it, we've got to figure out the value-added component of the energy, just like the value added for the gas. But for coal, the ERC was just successful in getting a rare earth elements proposal, right? 2 of them, Tom? And so the Department of Energy has these proposals they put out. We put them in. We won those proposals with University of Kentucky on one and the IAS at UND and the other, and working with some of the different coal companies. But our lignite coal has what's called rare earth metals, and that's about the knowledge I have of it. And if you ask me any questions that are really hard, I'm going to tell you that I could answer it, but it's proprietary data, so I won't answer it. That wasn't a very good response. Okay, it's time to wake the audience up, all right? Everybody stand up, please. Come on, hear me out. This will be fun, all right? It will be fun. All right. All right, I have in my hand 2 tickets to UND hockey for this weekend's game. So I'm going to go through some questions. You have to be honest. Okay, so if you're really interested in going to a hockey game this Friday night, please stay standing. If you can drive to Grand Forks, let's be serious, okay? If you're really able to do it, please stay standing. I'm being honest. I don't want to see these tickets up on eBay. All right, good. Now we're getting down there. Okay. So now I have 2 tickets, and these are really good seats. These are level 300, Tom. So those are good, right? But nevertheless, it's 2 tickets to Friday night's game, and I want to thank you for staying for this because you now have a chance. So how many do we have left standing? Oh, we have people that are really willing to go to the game. Excellent. Okay, now, if your birthday or anniversary is between today and the end of the year, please stay standing. And if everybody sits down, this won't work. Oh, wait a minute. We still got 2. Okay, now we're down over here. Okay, so who do we have left? How many do we have left? 3. Okay, 3. So you can make 2 tickets to Friday night work? Okay, so when's your birthday?
November 5th.
November 5th?
October 28th.
Oh, sorry, man. Dave? Ha! We have the winner. So 2 tickets to UND's game. Thank you for staying for the presentation.
I live right there, Brad.
That's funny, man. See, it pays to be alert, right? Okay, let's keep moving here. But we have to make more out of coal. You have to make the rare earth elements. We have to figure out the streams. One of the presenters was talking about all the things they're doing with coal. That's got to be the way forward. We got to figure out how to make this stuff, how to sell this stuff, whether we get the rare earth elements in the front end of the coal or the back end. That's the path forward. And the last but not least, educate the world. One of the things that I really saw, whether I was working at NDSU, working up at UND, working on the commission, people don't see they don't get all the facts. So anything that the EERC can do to help you educate people out there what's going on I would say, we really try to be unbiased, try to work on both sides of the equation. We need to educate people how you can have an all-the-above energy policy, how you can have $2 million, 2 million barrels of oil, how you can do all those kind of things. So I believe that is my last slide. Oh, wait, no, it's not my last slide. This is my last slide. Once again, the clicker. It's very important that we do all these things we're talking about. It's good for North Dakota, it's good for our country, it's good for national security. I really believe that. We're still fighting wars over energy, and we talk about how we tie into the world. We heard Senator Hoeven, Senator Heitkamp, and Congressman Kramer. Our delegation gets it, our governor gets it, our lieutenant governor gets it, the companies get it. So not only benefiting North Dakota, we're benefiting everybody in this whole deal. So that's what the ERC is up to. We'd love to do work with you in any capacity. Tom, is there anything that I forgot? Am I still on double secret probation? Damn. Okay, so we have 7 minutes for questions. Emily, I'm keeping on schedule. Are there any questions? If not, I will wander off. Okay, going once, going twice. You know the adage, right, Senator? Be brief, be bright, be gone. All right, thank you all.
Thank you, Brian. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dave Glott, for our final presentation. As you know, this last legislative session brought some changes to environmental health. Dave has been the section chief of that department since 2002 and is here today to share with us the progress and status of North Dakota's new DEQ. And I don't know if he heard that Brian gave away tickets, so I'm excited to see what Dave's going to have for us for a prize.
Am I on? Yeah.
You're on?
Thanks.
Thank you.
You know, I'd really like to give you Super Bowl tickets and free flights and hotel room, but state regulations don't really allow me to do that. But otherwise, I would have. First of all, thank you for allowing me to talk today. And what I'm going to talk about is what's the progress on the DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality. In this last session, there was a law that passed that said that the health department should start looking at developing a standalone environmental agency. So I'm going to spend a few minutes today talking about that, give you a little background, talk about where we're at in the process, talk about some of the challenges and where we hope to be by July 1st of next year. That is kind of a pie-in-the-sky goal, but you have to set goals someplace and we'll start working towards them. In the last session, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not there should be a standalone environmental agency. A little background on that, we are one of 5 agencies in the nation that has a health department, environmental group, all in one agency. So that really is more uncommon than common. Most of the other remaining states are either DEQs or DNRs. So the discussion, and that discussion's been had every year I've been with the department. the discussion's been whether or not we should have our own environmental agency. And up to this point, my predecessor, I did for many years say, you know, just the timing isn't right now. We should stay where we're at. This is a session when they sat down with leadership and they asked, should we do it? We think this is the time to move forward. And my response was, do what you think is right for the citizens of the state. It's not about who all is here today and how we go about our daily work. It's about when you look 10 years down the road, what should the state look like as far as environmental protection? And if you think a separate agency is the way to go, then we should do that. So they were talking about that, and then we also talked about the importance of environmental protection. That's really changed over the years. When we were first established, it was more local. You had your sanitary engineer, and they're worried about the sewage systems, about the wells in town, making sure those are all taken care of. Well, that's expanded now to statewide, to regional issues, to national issues, to even international issues. Things that we do here in North Dakota through air movements, through water movements, impact places thousands of miles away. So policy decisions here impact more than just a small city or a county. It impacts the region, the nation, and the world. So the importance of environmental regulations and policy has really been elevated. You all know that, working in the various industries, that sooner or later you can talk about regulations, and I will bet a pair of Super Bowl tickets that sooner or later you talk about environmental regulations, good, bad, or indifferent. So that is ingrained in what we do. Also, when we were looking at the health department, the environmental portion of the health department was almost 50% of the health department. Out of the 360 employees, we were 172. So when you put that all together, the importance of environmental regulations, we're one of a few states that has health department and environmental regulations put together. We needed to start looking at breaking apart. The other thing that was really center and foremost is setting priorities. When you look at setting priorities and you put it in the health department, we had to compete for number one, number two, number three priorities for the health department when we were looking at environmental issues. But you also looked at heart disease, cancer, domestic abuse, and all that. And I will tell you that when you sit down at the table and somebody says, we have to have fighting cancer as our number one priority, and I come and say, yeah, well, what about water quality? It doesn't really rise to that level. Water quality is important, but when you start putting it into immediate people's lives, the priorities get too much competition there. Not to say that one is more important than the other, but we lost out. So we never really had priorities as number one. That changed a little bit with the Bakken. Things happened so quickly, so fast. Impacts were being seen immediately. We needed to have, and we were just forced more into the front. We're in the papers, it seemed like almost on a daily or weekly basis. We're on news radio stations, all asking about how are you protecting the environment, what's your challenges, and we were at the forefront. With all that going on, I think it was time for us to change and go into our own agency. Now that was a little controversial because when we're having a governor that says we're going to shrink government, yet you start breaking out to this own different agency, like, what's the mixed message there? It was about efficiency. It's about getting more notoriety. You would not imagine the number of legislators that came up to me and said, well, now that you're going to be your own agency, you need to hire staff, right? And you need to rent a building, right? They had no clue of what we did. We were, all of a sudden, in some of their minds, we were establishing a whole new agency that never existed before. That shows a little bit of a problem on our end of getting the messaging out. So the 2327 came about. What it was going to do is going to break us out into our own agency. We have till July 1st, 2019 to make that happen, which seems like a long time, but with all the things you got to do, it happens pretty quick. It changed the position, the chair I sit in now It changes it from a classified position into a cabinet position appointed by the governor, with the intent, and it was just explained to me. I said, well, why are we doing that? And the answer that came back is to make the job less political. Okay, you're going to have a cabinet position appointed by a governor, that the job's going to be less political. I get it, I think. But I understand that. It elevates that. One of the things we talked about, though, is that if you make that position, and I'm not here to offend anybody, but if you make that position a cabinet-appointed position, we want it with somebody with a science and technical background. We don't want just a law degree. You can have a law degree, but you have to have a degree in there somewhere that says, I know about science, I know about technical engineering stuff. Because that's what we are all about, science and the law. The legal stuff, we can hire attorneys to help us out with that. But that was first and foremost. The other thing that was going to happen is that we have several boards now. We have the Air Quality Board, Water Pollution Control Board. We're going to combine those into a Department of Environmental Quality Advisory Board. That's a 13-member board that includes some state agencies, representation from energy, representation from municipalities, from agriculture, all coming together, that we will bounce off policy decisions, rules, to get some feedback of what makes sense, or if we're hitting a third rail that maybe we should look at a little bit more closely before we go out to the public. I find these kind of boards to be very beneficial. They are really a good sounding board, but for various reasons, they don't control what the department does. It's kind of tough for industry to have an input on rules when they're going to be regulated on that and have a decision-making authority up top. That's kind of a conflict of interest. But what they say and provide to us is very valuable. So that's where we're going. Where we're kind of at is, the first thing we're looking at is the rules. Those of you who deal with us, you know we got volumes and volumes of rules. The thing we have to do there is we have to change names. From the Department of Health to DEQ. There is some numbering changes that goes on, and it's pretty meticulous, and we have staff going through that now along with the Attorney General's office. We have to public notice that. And then once we public notice that, go through the whole process, we're looking at about a 6-month process just to get that done. One of the things that's come up recently is we do have a law in the books that says we shall be no more stringent than federal law. We had some rules that were promulgated prior to that law and were grandfathered in. I'm giving you some inside secrets here. What we have to do when we change the rules, we repeal those and we reestablish new rules. So we have to circle back and justify why, if we have any rules that are more stringent than federal, why? And we need to go to the legislature and talk to them about that. They may see the rationale behind it, they may not. You may see the rationale behind it, you may or may not. But that's one of the areas that we need to start looking at. That's going to create a little more work for us as we move forward. But I think we can get through that. The other thing we want to look at is primacy. EPA primacy. EPA gives us the authority to implement federal rules by the state at the local level. We currently have agreements on the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, RCRA, Safe Drinking Water Act, and we implement those programs for the federal agency at the state level through the state government. We want to make sure that those primacy agreements move along with us as we move forward to the new agency. That is being somewhat of a challenge. I did contact EPA and I said, you know, we're going to make this change. And the first response I got back is, we've never done that before. And I go, wait a minute, you have 45 states that are DEQs. Didn't you do that at one point? Yeah, but that was a while back. I think we can get through this. I think they've done it before. But we need to go through that process and get approval to let them know and give them the confidence that what we are today will be the same tomorrow with our staff and ability to implement the rules at the state level. The other thing we're looking at is, how is our organization going to look? We have an opportunity now to make some changes. I think we're doing some things good, but you can always do things better. And so I've tasked a couple work groups within our organization to take a look at organizationally, how do we operate? What works best? I've also tasked them to go outside of our agency and ask the public, what do you want the health department, DEQ, it's going to take me a while to get there, what do you want the DEQ to be? How do you want them to interrelate with the public, with industry, with the municipalities? How can we work together better to protect the environment? This is an opportunity for us to start getting input. We're looking at ways on how to get that input, either through public meetings or through electronic means, probably both. You know, typically what I found out, if there isn't a house on fire, we have these kind of public meetings, it's the janitor, myself, and a tray of cookies and some coffee. If there's controversy out there, people will show up. I don't advocate creating controversy. I think there's some of it out there already. But we want input from industry. We want input from municipalities and from environmental groups. Because I will tell you that where we're at now, we spent, in the last biennium, we spent over $800,000 on just attorney's fees doing this. That $800,000 could go a long ways in doing environmental protection. How can we do this better? I think there will always be a need for attorneys. There always, for those of you who are attorneys out there, job security, and judges and courts and stuff like that. But how do we look more at solutions? Because we want a vibrant economy. We want to protect the environment. I don't think those are mutually exclusive, but we need everybody at the table. How do we do that better? The other thing we're looking at is workforce. And those of you that are in industry, trying to attract a highly technical workforce is challenging. So we got work groups working on that as what are the monetary incentives and the non-monetary incentives that would bring people to work for us. Just recently I was walking, I had been working on the car, so it was pretty greasy, as the grocery store, good sanitary place to be when you're all greasy. And walking through there, and I had two people walk up to me and said, we want to work for you. My first reaction was, oh great. When I was walking away, I said, what's the catch? Because nobody comes up to us and says, I want to work for state government. That tells me we're doing something kind of right. So I'm looking forward to what we can do on a workforce end. Because those of you who work for industry, if the state government doesn't have a highly competent technical workforce, that affects you. It affects your permitting, affects all that kind of stuff. How we go about addressing the science behind the things that we do, we need highly technical people that want to stay with us and work on environmental issues. And we have some of that, but we're starting to see that wave of retirement and institutional memory starting to move on. So we're working on the workforce as well. Out of all of that, the thing that I found out to be the most divisive is a logo. And, you know, you think of all the things, I got to deal with the budgets, and we got to make this all happen, and then somebody comes in and said, what do we do about the logo? I said, oh, that's not a problem, you know, just like DEQ, and put it in blue and whatever, and nope, it's got to be something better than that. So we had some people kind of goof around with it a little bit. Nobody likes anything. And they all have, that's the most emotional opinion, is that tells everybody who we are. It's our logo. So if this gets delayed at all, it's because we haven't come up with a right stamp. So what I'd like to do with that is to find some way where we can incentivize people outside of our building. Some type of a contest where you go from grade schools to colleges, to their marketing folks saying, let's have a contest, what would a logo be like for the Department of Environmental Quality? And give a small monetary prize. The reason I can't do it, that is the same reason I can't give you Super Bowl tickets, I guess, is that there are some laws that you can't do that. But for me, why not use that intellectual memory or intelligence for the whole state? We may get a third grader that has the best idea out there. And I would like to incentivize that. It does a couple things. It gets utilize the collective intelligence of the state of North Dakota. It gets the word out that we're changing, going into our own. I'd like to do something like that. I'd also like to do something like that, and Wyoming has done that on various carbon capture projects. A lot bigger prize, obviously. But they throw out like $10 million for companies to come up with how do you use carbon dioxide to develop new products. Companies are spending tens of millions of dollars to win this prize. For a $10 million prize, they may spend $50 million on various development. It's not so much the prize, it's notoriety developing of science. I think we can do that at a small scale on some of the things we do within the health department. We don't have all the answers. Industry has a lot of answers, but we need to be greater than just the four walls that we work in. We need to reach out. And so we're looking at the logo, maybe our first foray into that area. And I will guarantee you, any logo we come up with, half of you will not like it. And I'm here to tell you, I don't care. Because we're going to get it done one way or another. The other thing we were going to look at is things such as accounting and human resources. We are looking at contracting with our existing folks so we don't have to create new positions. They already know us. So there's some cost savings in going with accounting folks that already do accounting for us. There's some cost savings in going with HR that already does HR for us. So I think we'll start that movement, which I think will go farther out throughout the state, is how do we collectively use some services more efficiently with not each one of us having our own accounting person, that we use it more efficiently in a group type setting. One of the things that we do truly, really poor on is outreach. And that's maybe part of being North Dakotan. So you're kind of humble. Yeah, you do a good job, you're expected to do it. No, you don't need a pat on the back. You're expected to do the good job, you do it, and you go about your business. In this day and age, there's people that want to, and most of you know this, they want to shape the discussion, not always following good science. I think DAPL told us a little bit about that, is that there are people out there that are willing to put out purportedly news that really isn't factual. And then we're forever trying to explain ourselves, trying to play catch up. We need to do a better job of outreach, telling people what we do, the good things that we do, the concerns that we have, and trying to get people more engaged. But first and foremost, when people go look for, they want to get the straight scoop, we need to be totally honest with ourselves, and we have to be that agency where they can go to and they know they will get the straight scoop. We have to be honest with ourselves, and sometimes putting out that straight scoop doesn't make us look very good. But being honest that way, I think you will start that dialogue. People understand that we don't have an agenda. We have the science to follow and the law, and that's what we're trying to do. So we're going to do a better job of outreach. Hopefully it won't make you guys sick, but to get that, when I have legislators coming to me not really knowing what we do, we're failing. We need to do a better job there, and that's one of the things we'll do. One of the ways we're going to start also doing that is utilizing data. Outreach through what they call dashboards, where you can put your data out where public can look at it and internalize it really quickly and see what's going good and what's going bad. An example of that, we've had the smoke from the fires not too long ago. We looked like Los Angeles, where you could only see a quarter mile at best because of all the smoke out there. On our webpage, we have a map that shows areas of green, areas of yellow, areas of red. As a public, you don't need to know about parts per billion or milligrams per cubic meter or whatever. You just, if you're in the green zone, that's good. Yellow, you got to have caution. Red, that's bad. I don't, typically right now when somebody asks for data, we're really good at printing out about 3 feet thick of data and numbers and saying, here you go. I defy anybody to make any heads or tails of that. We need to take our data, that 3 foot thick stack of stuff, put it in maps like that, so where the public can look at it and say things are going good. When I approached staff on this, they said, hey, that sounds like a good idea, but we don't want to provide this stuff because it didn't make us look very good. That goes back to the honesty end of it. Show them where we're doing good, but also show them where we're not doing very good. Show them where the skeletons in the closet are. That's where we can start looking at prioritizing work, doing our workload. in those kind of an outreach. I've also talked with the surrounding states. I'd like our database and our dashboard to be compatible with the adjacent states, so we can see how Minnesota's doing. They're doing terrible, by the way. But no, they're not. I'll get quoted on that and I'll get a phone call. But you can compare across the border. The environment does not respect political boundaries. We need to talk to South Dakota and Montana, so at least there's some apples to apples comparison when we're out there looking at the quality of the environment. That's one of the things that we'll be doing as we move forward. So it's data transparency. Because the vast majority of the public, they don't care about monitors going 24/7, 365 days out of the year. Tell me, is the air quality better? Is it worse? Tell me, and tell me what you're doing about it. We're hopeful that we'll be able to provide a web page that they can go one-stop shop. They'll get that to happen. Be able to do vast majority of their permitting online. Find technology or ways in technology we can do this to make government work better. At the end of the day, it's about compliance. It's about working with industry. It's about being able to identify the real issues, sitting down at the table, and how do we fix them. I'll get off on my soapbox real quick. I'll get on my soapbox real quick, is that one of the things that we looked at doing something similar to that is in the oil industry. EPA was taking enforcement action against one company. 6 months into the negotiations, while the emissions were still going, we're sitting at a table with no less than 7 attorneys in the room. The discussion was, what's the definition of a day? 3 blasted hours to talk about what is a day. I was beside myself. I was going, you still got stuff coming out of the pipe. We're talking about, is a day 8 hours? Is a day 24 hours? And then when one attorney said, what about leap year? I about leaped out of the room. I said, are you guys nuts? Come on. So what we decided to do is said, we can't participate in this anymore. Because you go, by the time you get through dealing with the oil industry on issues that we all agree are there, we'll all be dead and gone, and the oil will be out of the ground, and we're all away. So I sat down with the oil industry and I said, what do we do? We got problems, guys. Here's the problems that we have. What do we do? First meeting, they didn't admit to it. They took it all in. I said, excuse my language, I said, this shit's got to stop. We go out and we're finding 80% non-compliance. This has got to stop. To the credit of the industry, within a couple weeks, I started getting phone calls saying, yeah, you're right. We need to do this differently. So we went to, and we talked about what is the right vehicle. We did what is called a global compliance agreement. Not enforcement, compliance agreement. It talked about how do we fix the issues. And I said, I don't care. I can see when something comes out of a pipe into the air or goes onto the ground, I know that's a problem. I don't know how to fix it. It's incumbent upon me to trust you to step back and say, fix it, guys. You come up with the innovative ways. What we found out, long story short, is that innovation was coming in through the door on a weekly basis. Companies were coming in to talking to us. They were all a little bit different, but they took care of the problem. We took care of, or in the process of taking care of 80% of the oil patch with just sitting down and talking about it. That was to me, and what we're seeing is the 20% compliance rate now starting to flip. Well, we're seeing 80% compliance in a short period of time. Never would have got that in the federal process. Interesting enough, the EPA, first they liked it. Then I told them that penalties weren't the reason I'm doing this. It's not a pound of flesh type of deal. They backed away. They said, you're not collecting enough money. I said, I'll take that. If we can get compliance, and I said, the challenge is, I should have bet Super Bowl tickets because I probably would have got them. If we can show you widespread compliance in a lot shorter period of time than you ever will. Yeah, that's what they said. Now I've got a backhanded compliment. They said, maybe you were right. Yeah, maybe we were. I'd like to continue that. I'd like to continue that dialogue. It's about government doesn't have all the answers. We know we all want to protect the environment. How do we best do that? Partner with industry. We will get criticized that we're in bed with industry. I'm here to tell you, if compliance is quicker, more innovative, moving forward, I'm in bed with industry. I don't have any problem with that moniker. I can be an environmental prostitute with the best of them. We'll make this happen, but it's about compliance, and it's about improving the environment, and that's what we have to be about. So I look forward to this as we move forward with this transition. I think there's some neat things that are going to happen. We'll be looking at input from groups like yours of how we should be with our mind and eye on the goal of compliance. How can we get there? How can we develop compliance strategies that are unique to North Dakota because we have a climate that's not like Texas? That might be a little bit different. But at the end of the day, we can show compliance, and we can show a robust economy, and that's our goal as DEQ. We want to maintain EPA primacy, and I will tell you real quickly that our dealings with EPA have changed dramatically. I don't care if you're a Trump supporter or not. I will tell you from my dealings with an EPA 4 years ago to the EPA in the last several months is light years different. Instead of them coming to us, pointing their fingers saying, you're screwing up, we need to overfile, and us fighting like this, they're now coming to us saying, what can we do to help? You guys have the lead. You guys do this. That is a change that, man, that's refreshing. But we have to take advantage of it now, and we have to put up or shut up. We think the state can do a better job. We got to show them we can. We do it the state's way. And as we move forward, more outreach, more data transparency. Some of this data that goes out, some people may be at first like, no, don't say that. And it is what it is. If you're going to go collect data, let the public know. Get the public engaged. I know that we have the naysayers out there. As it relates to the logo, I know what I'm going to get if I go outside. I'll get somebody with a logo that has an oil well and spewing oil and a bunch of dead ducks around there. I know I'm going to get that. But I also know is that once you get bringing people to sensible people to the table, they understand that there is several different ways to skin a cat. That it doesn't always have to be adversarial, and that we can find a solution. That's what we have to be about as a DEQ, and that's what we're moving forward on. So with that, I'll quit. I'll get off my soapbox and quit pontificating. It's a word I heard just the other day. So if any questions that you may have as we move forward as a DEQ, any suggestions you may have as we move forward as a DEQ. That works for me. Nobody gets any Super Bowl tickets, I'll tell you that. I look forward to this process, and I look forward to the engagement with, I see Senator Wardner's here. This will be a zero impact on the budget as we transition. I want to make sure of that. Yeah, that's what.
You're telling everybody that. Everybody wants to believe it.
Well, and I want to make you guys telling the truth too. I want to show that, and I think we're confident. There's always challenges, you know. We like with. No more stringent than federal regulations. It seems like we take one step forward and there's a cliff. And you negotiate that cliff and you take another step forward. I have a tendency to oversimplify things, make them really simple, and I find out life isn't that simple sometimes, and there's some complexities, but we'll get through them, and I look forward to having a new DEQ. People have asked me, so you're going to be the new cabinet member? And I said, depends. One of the things I've learned through this, as I worked, been with the department 34 years, one of the governors in the past went into his office and said, hey, Dave, you're doing an excellent job. And I said, Governor, I'm only as good as my last decision. And he goes, yeah, that's right. So hopefully my decisions still keep working good, and I have a chance to be a cabinet. But, you know, the governor has to make decisions, and he has to do what's best for North Dakota. And we look forward to breaking off into a new DEQ, working with industry, working with the public, and being more open so people can, good, bad, or indifferent, interact with us more. And so I look forward to that change. So with that, I appreciate your time and listening to me for the last half hour. And feel free, if you have any input, give us a call. Drop by the office, give us a phone call, drop us an email. More than happy to respond to anything and everything that you would have. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dave. Before I ask our Lieutenant Governor to come up and wrap up the day's events for us, I have a few housekeeping items. First, a reminder that you will be receiving a survey in your email. We'd love your suggestions and get feedback for this year and what we should do next year. And we will also be sending out an email when slides and video of today's event are available on our website. That should be sometime next week. And lastly, I'd like to acknowledge our wonderful conference planning committee and the BSC team that helped us run the conference this year. From Senator Hoeven's office, Kristen Hammond. From Senator Heitkamp's office, Joanne Beckman. From Congressman Kramer's office, Rick Collin. From Governor Burgum's office, Cassandra Torstensen and Robbie Loff. From KLJ, Jill Belkey, Kaylee Richards, and Jesse Thomas. From Department of Commerce, Justin Dever. And from BSC, Dusty Anderson, Cole Bernhardt, Darren Unterseyer, Jesse Carmen, Deb Mance, Janelle Campbell, Retha Mattern, and Roxanne Van Summeren. And I want to give a special shout out to Mary Morrell. I'm sure you've seen her all over the event today. She's our logistics guru, and it wouldn't have happened today without her. It's a wonderful team, so if you could help me acknowledge all of their hard work. Now, I would like to ask our Lieutenant Governor to come and wrap up the day's events for us. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here today. You can tell why I enjoy my job so much when you have a day like today. We talk about Empower Commission. We get to be with all the coal people, all the energy people, and UAS people as well. So it made for a great day. We got to hear Brian Kalk tell jokes. We got to hear Randy's wisdom. And so I am glad I'm after Randy. Maybe we can keep it a little bit short, keep it a little bit quick. But thank you very much for all the information to everyone. We want to thank BSC for hosting a great event. And the view is spectacular, as the Senator noticed this morning. To all the industry folks in the room, I'd like to say we're extremely grateful for the important work you do to keep the lights on, to power our communities and economy, and everything you do to make our state a net energy exporter and to help make our nation energy secure. And to our regulatory people, like Dave, thank you for ensuring that energy development is done responsibly in North Dakota. When Senator Hoeven first came up with Empower in 2001, it was a great vision to get everyone on the same page for an all-the-above approach to energy development, assembling voices from all aspects of the state's energy resources. And then the 2007 legislature advanced that vision with the Empower Commission. Those actions and the Commission's actions in recommending and advocating policy have paid huge dividends. As you heard today, North Dakota has seen tremendous growth in the energy industries over the past decade. It's quite phenomenal, actually, when you think of since 2007, oil production has increased by 35 times. That's not 35%, 35 times. Ethanol during that same time has doubled. Wind production during that time has increased by 8 times. And as we know and have seen in quite a few presentations today, our coal industry, North Dakota has the second largest known reserves of lignite in the world, behind Australia, with an estimated 25 billion tons of recoverable resources. Our power plants have invested around $1 billion in new technology, again in the last 10 years, to reduce emissions and increase efficiencies. We're one of only 7 states that meet all the EPA's federal ambient air quality standards. Coal accounted for 71% of North Dakota's net electricity generation last year. Wind was 21% and 5% from hydroelectric power. Overall, North Dakota's energy production has more than quadrupled in that 10-year period we keep referring to, from 762 trillion BTUs of energy in 2007 to 3,655 trillion BTUs of energy now. We're now ranked 6th in the nation for energy production, up from 23rd in 2007. That's quite phenomenal for a state of 750,000 people when you think about that. Something we can all be proud of, especially those in this room. President Trump and his administration are giving us a reprieve from the restrictive regulations of the previous administration, such as the Waters of the U.S. rule and the Clean Power Plan. But there's no guarantee it will last. Now more than ever is the time to embrace our all-of-the-above approach and position North Dakota as a net energy exporter, helping our nation become not just energy independent, but energy dominant. Our future is one where the energy sector has the potential to grow production, to develop new economies based on value-added opportunities related to energy resources. Large-scale capital formation plus low-cost gas can equal value-added creation of plastics, fertilizer, and more in the very near future. Innovation and the development of new technologies have been and will continue to be key to the success of North Dakota's energy industries. North Dakota's Bakken Formation is a technology-driven play with horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing technologies making it possible. Enhanced oil recovery technologies, including the potential use of carbon dioxide, could provide the ability to recover millions, possibly billions, more barrels of oil in this state. In a carbon-restrained world, improved carbon capture and storage technologies will enable our lignite industry to continue into the future. Technologies we're looking to prove through large-scale demonstration projects such as the Alum Cycle and Project Tundra are very exciting when taken in context of this. Also for wind power, technological advancements in blade design and turbines are also leading to an ever lower cost of production per megawatt. In Grand Forks, the world's largest blade supplier, LM Wind Power's 1,000 employees produce blades that are sold nationwide and globally. We can't lose the focus on our all-the-above approach at Empower, which is important not only to our status as an energy-producing state, but also our overall economy in North Dakota. The state remains committed to state primacy in energy and environmental regulations as well. As you just heard from Dave Glott, the new Department of Environmental Quality will provide the autonomy it needs to be more efficient, flexible, and better able to implement federal regulations. It will continue the state's commitment to protecting North Dakota's clean air, water, and land resources that we all cherish. Technology and the free market consumer choice will ultimately determine which energy sectors thrive and which fall by the wayside. But in the meantime, it's critical that we preserve and upgrade our baseload generation and that we explore new, cleaner energy sources. And we'll do it through innovation, not regulation. So keep doing what you do, innovating us forward. Thank you very much for being here today, and continue on what you're doing and continue us on this path. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.